Days away from completing an Atlantic crossing, this happened. After sharing this episode, the overwhelming questions, criticisms, and feedback prompted me to make a response video.
Hello and welcome to Bums on a Boat. My name is Joel and you are in the Boab studio. I am making this response video before I move on and make the next episodes of an epic voyage where I get the privilege of sailing from Grenada to Dubai, halfway around the world, 10,000+ miles, across the Atlantic, through the Mediterranean, through the Suez Canal, through the Red Sea. I mean, yeah, but it's a little messy. Of course, life is messy, but this delivery was messy, and I am sharing some of the messiness of it. This video is not for the trolls who desperately seek attention by unleashing their hatred and ignorance as keyboard warriors, or for the armchair captains with no sailing experience and no plans of gaining any. This video is for those genuinely wanting to sail across oceans and to live a boat life of their own. It's also for the delivery captains and experienced sailors who want to better understand the situation, and those who are simply curious and would appreciate more of an explanation. The mistake was made before we ever left the anchorage, and that mistake was not better securing the dinghy. We had 2 ratchet straps that were not used before we left. Although we tied the dinghy tight to the davits, in my opinion, I think we could have avoided all of this. Although it's impossible to really know what would have happened, it needed to be better secured, cinched super tight up against the davits so that there was no play. The captain has the greatest responsibility, as it was his call and his boat and everything, but still, I was crew, and if I was a better crew, I would have brought that to his attention. That's the mistake. All of this compounded. It could have most likely been avoided had we better secured the dinghy before we left Anchorage. The number one question / suggestion / berating, which is valid, is why did you not slow the boat down? And I admit that I had the exact same thought immediately when all of this was happening. But I knew my role, and I've been humbled, especially during this delivery. But I also was looking to these two with hundreds of thousands of sea miles more than me, and also having done deliveries, I can't explain how many. This was my first delivery. Okay, my first delivery. I've been sailing my own boat. I'm the captain on my own boat and just making my own calls and learning and making bonehead mistakes. It's been a lot of responsibility for me, but I was really looking to these two and slowing the boat down. I'm gonna walk you through possibly what was going through the captain and Danny's heads, because I can't speak for them. I'm only speaking for me. So you can look at me as a journalist who is going out on the ocean, who is sailing, putting myself out in these crazy scenarios, turning cameras on, and genuinely wanting to learn and share this experience. You know, Steve and Judy from Sailing Fair Isle, they were journalists, and Judy referred to me as a journalist, and that's a huge compliment for me. It's a tough job I got. I'm taking fire from all angles here, and that's okay though. That's all right, because that's what I signed up for. Why didn't we slow the boat down? The problem started when a D-ring busted, and there's 3 points on the dinghy that are holding the weight of that dinghy, and that dinghy was heavy in that outboard. And one of those aft D-rings broke, and so we were tying lines to every possible point we could find on the dinghy, and we were pulling it as tight as we could to get it up as high as we could out of the water. So at that point, we were in trouble when that D-ring broke, and that happened days ago in calm waters. We had already secured lines to points on the dinghy, pulled it up, and they had busted. At least 3 to 4 different points that we found that seemed, the strongest points we could find, they were just ripping out left and right. The ladder, there was a little handle on the side. It was stainless steel handle. That thing just ripped right out through the fiberglass. Everything was just ripping out. There was nothing else to secure a line to. Now you might say, why not run something underneath the whole dinghy and pull it up? Well, we already did that. We used the ratchet strap that I already acknowledged that we should have used before we ever left the anchorage. Again, I'm going to say, at the end, I will give what I believe could be learned from all this and how to avoid it in the future. And really, in this situation, we were already in pretty deep, and it was a compound mistake that could have been avoided from just securing the dinghy better. The ratchet straps going down underneath the dinghy and pulling it up was an idea, and we already had that and cinched it as tight as possible, and that was as high as we could get the dinghy up out of the water. So once that line broke from the swim ladder, there was nothing else to tie a line to on the dinghy anywhere. There was no way to pull it up out of the water. So, I mean, slowing down to assess the situation, yes, I'm going to say, in my opinion, that sounds like a logical idea. Slow the boat down and then see what you can do. So let's just say we slow the boat down. There was nowhere else to tie a line to try to pull the dinghy up to the davits. So getting the dinghy up out of the water and tighter to the davits, there was no other way. We had broken every point that we could get a line on to pull the dinghy up, and we had something underneath the dinghy already that in calm waters we rigged up and cinched it as tight as possible, and that was all that we could get from it. So let's say we slow the boat down. There was some other suggestions that I thought were good ones that I would like to address. One was, well, why not just tow the dinghy? Why not, just put it in the water, tie a long line to it, and tow it? Okay, that's fair. Those tubes were deflating. Every day I'd have to go out and pump the tubes up. In one day they would completely lose all air. The tubes had holes. We already tried to fix the tubes before we left. We couldn't get to the bottom of it. And so anyways, those tubes were deflating. That outboard was extremely heavy, many hundreds of pounds. And then the bottom of that dinghy was all fiberglass. So that whole entire boat was heavy. Like, I don't know exactly, but it had to be around 1,000 pounds or more. And those tubes were losing air quickly. So, and we were in 6 to 8 foot seas at that point, and the seas were building. So 20 plus knots of wind. And we were going into the night. So that boat would have been underwater quickly. One wave comes over it. We would have been towing. We would have been dragging the dinghy and outboard just underwater. It would have been more of a sea anchor, just dragging underwater. The outboard, everything would have been completely ruined, and it would have added so much more time. And we arrived with a dinghy that was just dragged under the ocean for how long? For a few days. That was, and it was not safe to go out in the middle of the night to go pump it up. And not to mention, it would have sunk. I've seen dinghies, I've towed dinghies, and I've learned the hard way. You never tow a dinghy. I've already learned that the hard way. Towing a dinghy in any kind of seas, you're just asking for a disaster. It's gonna sink. You're gonna lose an outboard. Yeah, I learned that the hard way. So towing that dinghy, like I said, it would have been underwater. The outboard, everything would have been ruined, and we would have just had a liability, a big, heavy, dinghy just underwater, outboard just dragging behind the boat and possibly tangling up in propellers and rudders, and eventually have to cut that free. So towing the dinghy was not an option. Okay, another logical suggestion was, pull the outboard up, pull everything up on the deck, right. Well, this outboard was not a typical outboard. On my boat, it has, you can take the mounts off and lift the outboard up, and you can maneuver it. This outboard does not lift up off the transom. It is built into the boat with wires, and also it was hooked to a steering wheel, and it was part of the boat. There was no way to just get out there, and even if we did, nobody could even come close. Even all of us could not lift it. So that left. Okay, you're like, yeah, but you guys, you can, be sailors, right? So imagine you're in these crazy seas. Let's just say, okay, we're going to get this outboard and we're going to get the dinghy up onto the deck. There's the other option, right? Let's slow the boat down. Let's get out. Let's get the dinghy down in the water. Let's get it to the side of Amelia, right? Go get the main halyard, lower the main halyard down to the dinghy, okay? And someone's out there in the dinghy. Okay, so now we're risking someone seriously getting hurt. Someone's got to be out in the dinghy and get the dinghy around to the side of the boat. to hook it up. Even if you say, well, get the painter and drag it around to the side, okay, maybe you can do that and hook the painter to the halyard and then drag the whole boat up, use the halyard, the main halyard, and scratch the whole side of that $1 million catamaran up with the outboard and bang in the seas. And maybe let's just say we just annihilate the boat trying to drag that thing up, risking people getting hurt, okay? That's the other thing. To get that dinghy up onto the deck, it was so heavy. And that outboard, like I said, the outboard did not come off the back of that boat. It wasn't a typical outboard. There was nowhere to mount the outboard. Getting that... it was way more risk. Okay, so I'm just guessing Tony and Danny, maybe they just knew all of this ahead of time. I don't know, because it happened quick. But so get the boat up on the dinghy. Well, okay, I'm just telling you right now, that was going to be extremely difficult to impossible. And I know that because we had to raise the mainsail. The mainsail of that boat was so heavy, we couldn't even lift it up onto the boat. We had to go alongside, hook the main halyard to a mainsail, which is tiny. It was in the dinghy. The mainsail compared to the dinghy and outboard, was tiny. And that thing was heavy, and we hooked it up, and it took two of us down there and one up top, and it was hitting the boat, and we're trying to keep it away as we use the halyard and use the electric winch and pulls the mainsail up, and then when it gets over the lifeline, it swings, and we were doing that on anchor, okay? We weren't out there in 6 to 8 foot seas with 20 plus knots going into the night. And that was a mainsail. So that option is extremely dangerous and dicey, and you're going to cause damage to the boat worth more than that dinghy. And I will also say, it's worth noting that dinghy at $10,000 is 1% of the value of that boat. That is a $1 million catamaran. That dinghy is 1% of the value of the boat. So you try to do something dicey like that, and the outboard gashes into the side of it, you cause more damage than that dinghy is worth. Okay, I'm getting all fired up. Getting all fired up. No, but these are good questions, and I admit, I didn't really explain a whole lot. Just showed what happened. So, okay, towing the dinghy. We got a sunken dinghy, just dragging behind the boat. Ruined everything anyway. It's not going to be usable when we get to the other side. And it can seriously cause all sorts of issues, not to mention slow us down. Okay, so, and then pulling the dinghy and outboard up onto the deck at that point, it was the only possible way, like I said, was getting it alongside of the boat, hooking a halyard somehow to it, and dragging it up with the halyard. And that best case scenario, we caused a ton of damage to the side of Amelia. Or somebody could easily get hurt in many ways trying to get that thing up over the deck. Just a nightmare. That's a nightmare right there. So, okay, hopefully I've explained towing was not an option. Getting it on the deck, again, if it was any other, if it was my dinghy, I could have got out there, I could have unhooked the outboard and lifted it, and we could have even hooked a line to it, and we could have got the outboard off, and then my dinghy was manageable enough. That dinghy, and it was all so heavy, you guys. We're talking big boy stuff here. This wasn't any kind of dinghy or outboard that I've ever dealt with. All of this stuff was big, heavy, okay? So, putting on the deck was not a good option. Towing it, again, you're towing, it's just sunk. It's going to sink quickly. And you're towing a sunken disaster back there. All right, and then for all of those people who are concerned about other boats hitting it, or the littering, okay, first of all, there was nobody on our AIS when we let that dinghy go. That's at a minimum of 10-mile radius in all directions. There was nobody on our AIS. And like I said, with those tubes deflating and how heavy that outboard was and how heavy that fiberglass bottom was, with the seas that we had and the seas that were building in the wind, it did not take long. Now, I cannot guarantee this, okay? But I'm telling you, that boat sunk almost 2 miles down, and it didn't take long. One wave splashes over that, and I know this because I saw that dinghy at a dock, tied up to a dock, when it rained. It rained and the bilge pump was broken in it, and it was filling up with water. And I saw, and there was still room for a lot of water in it, and it was already sinking down to level with the tubes. It was close to going under at a dock, all right, with that heavy outboard. So This thing filled with water, one wave after another. All it took was just getting heavier and heavier. It flipped, and that outboard pulled it right down to the bottom of the ocean, almost 2 miles deep. And right now, it's just part of the ocean floor. There's fish using it as hidey holes, just like all the other wrecks that happen all throughout the ocean. And it's just a little fort for some fishies down there, way at the bottom of the ocean. That's what happened to it. No one's gonna find it. It sunk quickly. And we knew that. We knew it was sinking. We had to let her go. So for all those who are rightly concerned, again, nobody within a 10-mile radius, the boat did not last very long before it sunk. I cannot, if you can see that outboard and you're a sailor and you're somebody who's actually used boats, you understand how heavy that outboard is. You understand, okay? And it's a fiberglass bottom dinghy with tubes that were deflating, and within a day completely deflated with no air. That dinghy did not last. It sunk to the bottom of the ocean quickly. It's sad, I know. Okay, but she's gone. I've addressed some of the major concerns that I felt like were good questions, good suggestions. What can we learn about avoiding this terrible scenario? If you're going to cross oceans with the dinghy and the davits, secure it tight. Secure it so it has zero play. Pull it so tight to the davits that it does not move even an inch in any direction. If sailing with the dinghy and outboard in the davits is your only option, which I believe is your worst option. There's better options that I'm going to talk about. But let's say that's the only option you have, is to sail with the boat in the davits. What we can learn from this whole thing, it's not, oh, you should have got out in there and risked your life and maybe damaged the boat to try to save something that it was too far gone. And you know, no. We had a big mission to accomplish. We had many other things to consider. But let's just move past that, all right? Some of you guys got me real fired up. All right. So if you're going to sail with the dinghy and outboard in the davits, pull it so tight to the davits that it does not move at all. That would be it. Okay, but even better than that, secure the outboard to the boat and dinghy to the deck. Okay, that's how I sail on my boat. Not because I'm a pro, but because I couldn't even afford davits, so I don't even have dinghy davits, and it's a pain. But when I sail, I always pull my outboard off, and I have a mount on the stern of my boat, and I mount the outboard and I tie it really tight, and I even tie lines around it, and it's out of the water, and I pull my dinghy up onto the boat and flip it upside down. And many people sail this way with their dinghy on the deck, outboard mounted. Now I sailed with another salty guy that pulled his hard dinghy and outboard all up at once and secured it on the deck. This guy had 50 plus years of sailing experience, and he did not sail with it in davits. He didn't even have davits on his boat. But when we were in the Abaco and in small seas, he just towed it a long line and just towed his boat. But when we were going to do any kind of deep seas, he pulled the whole dinghy outboard up on the boat and put it on the deck. So that would be the number one way. If you can do that, get your outboard, get your dinghy on the deck somewhere, secure it tight, then you can avoid this whole disaster. The last thing we can learn is how to make a tough call. Nobody was hurt, and we got the vessel safely to the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. A captain must consider the bigger picture, make no excuses, and act in the moment. I'm going to reiterate, nobody was hurt, and we successfully got Amelia to the other side of the Atlantic Ocean. Mistakes were made, but are you going to tell me right now that you have never made a mistake in your life? All right? Throw the rock. What is it? He who is without sin, throw the first stone. He who is without a mistake, make the first comment. Make the first comment, but make sure you have never made a mistake. If you're going to make one of those critical, nasty, mean comments, you better make sure you've never made a mistake yourself, Mr., Mrs. Most likely you're a Mr., an old Mr. Troll. I'm just saying. Now, in regards to this voyage that I am going to continue to share with you, captains and people from all over had criticisms and spewed doubt, telling us, don't do it this way, don't do this route, you'll never make it. This is what I would do. They all had better ideas. They were scared, and rightly so. But it would be dangerous no matter which way we went. I'm going to move forward with sharing this epic voyage. Thank you for watching. See you next time.
Thank you to the Boab patrons, and thank you for watching Bums on a Boat, a dream started by these yahoos, one of which is me. Click here to subscribe and join the adventure that never seems to end.
These are the tales of Boab.